So why do we do anything? Why am I meditating? The feeling of quality. And then, of course, that's a two-part thing, feeling it. The quality's always there. What we really want to do is fill our bubble of perception with a feeling of quality, a feeling of timelessness. Ida, when you sit down to make art, you don't want to make something that people just look at. And a musician doesn't want to make music that people just listen to, or just hear. They really want them to listen to it. You want them to feel the art, not just look at it. You don't want to just looking and seeing it and feeling it are real two different things. You can tell when you meet somebody, are they really seeing you? Are they hearing what you have to say? Is there a feeling exchange occurring between the two people, or are we just talking? Like, is this just, sound waves bouncing off of you? Because it's like we're not even really communicating right now. We're not feeling each other. We're not vibing, as the young ones would say. So why am I doing anything? So what you were discussing, like the way that you were talking about it, reminded me of it just a scene like just popped into my head where we were at the park in Champaign and Long was teaching us Tai Chi on Sundays, and we were going every Sunday. It was about maybe 7 or 8 of us, I think. Sometimes just me and maybe one other person, but yeah, so we would meet every single Sunday. And I remember one Sunday, I think it was in the fall, because I remember like that smell, and Shayna and I have been talking about it, but it's apparently humans can smell the water or moisture in the soil, like to an nth degree of parts per million or whatever. But so I remember that. And I remember, we were doing our standing meditation and doing, our warm-ups and everything. And I don't remember what spurred him to say this, but he said that Tai Chi is not here to relax you. Like you're not doing your Tai Chi to relax. And I think it was because I was also doing Tai Chi Fit at the time, which is an amazing, fun, enjoyable thing to do, but it's different than the way that he teaches, right? So there was constantly this, I would be like, "Oh, but this person said," and he's like, "Well, okay, but that's not what I said." So choose whatever you want to do. These are kind of opposing things. Of course, I found ways to put them together. I don't think things are always opposing. They put them together and you get something interesting. But there were so many times when my teacher would say something and I would just be like, boy, that's stupid. Like I don't know what to do with that other than just shake my head and forget it. And then of course I don't forget it. I remember it 20 years or 15 years or whatever, however long it's been later. Probably less than that. It's probably less than I think. Probably like 9 years or so. But so it took maybe that amount of time for me to understand what he was talking about. And I think that that also applies to meditation because we're talking about more of a formal meditative practice. And so what I learned is that he was right, that if I am already relaxed when I come to do, that's what the warm up is for. That's what the Qigong is for. That's why you're doing it in the park. All of these things are supposed to help interrupt the normal stream of your internal processes so that you can create some space to do some energetic, you know, chi moving exercises. That's the idea. And he said that. He's like, well, that's why we do our warm-ups extra slow. And that's why we do these wavy hand things back and forth. That's why we do our standing meditation. We do these things so that we can relax and then do our Tai Chi. And I was like, oh, well, that's still, I don't know. That seems to everybody else, you're the only dude telling me that Tai Chi's not to relax. Everybody else is telling me the opposite. So of course I just, what do I think? I just do Tai Chi and I try to compare and contrast and see what is he talking about. And I found that my ability to do Tai Chi, which fundamentally should have absolutely no word in your mind. That's something you don't do with Tai Chi. You don't have words in your mind, right? Of course, that's a process and it's not the easiest thing in the world, but ideally, you want to be completely present with Tai Chi. It's a meditative practice, right? And it is formal because you're doing it typically at a certain space, at a certain time, in a certain way, and it's very ritualistic at times, right? So all of those things play into it. Yeah, so we're moving energy, cultivating energy. So the idea was we wanted to be relaxed before we did our Tai Chi because otherwise we weren't really moving energy or cultivating energy. We were just trying to not think. We were just trying to relax our muscles and our body. And of course, every time you try, it gets worse. You try not to think, it gets worse. If you don't have a plan, especially. And then the plan, one of the plans that Ida mentioned in formal meditation, of course, is using specific, deliberate, and intentional words as opposed to involuntary processes that just keep reoccurring that are very likely repetitive, habitual, and don't inspire you and make you feel well. Okay. Now, I also found that that is consistent with, so I have two main points to make about formal meditation, and this is the first one. So the first one is I actually found the same principle to be true when I sit down, however I choose to sit down or stand, because that's also very formal, right? That I'm doing it in a particular way at a particular time, and I have it set up, and that's when I'm going to do it. That's how I'm going to do it. And Ida's right. That builds personal power, intention, and will. I intended to do it at 4. I intended to not look at my phone. I intended to not go do these other things, and I did it. Intention, will, personal power. Pay attention to it, charge it. So that's it. That's all good. But what I noticed for me, and this is where the Ernest factor perhaps and your factor comes in as well, is that the success of my Tai Chi and the success of any formal practice was directly proportional to the, in air quotes, success of my informal practices going into it. So if I had a time, maybe 9 a.m. is when I'm going to do my standing meditation. I really do it in the kitchen about 8 a.m. So Shane is doing something, and so the kitchen is a nice long space. I can do a little bit of movement and standing or whatever. Well, if I go into that and I'm not practicing my informal practice, it's not settled. It's and that's going to bring it to the second point, but there's something missing from the Tai Chi that I'm doing because before I did the Tai Chi, I wasn't as relaxed. However, I also noticed this is experientially, so I'm just noticing consistencies and anomalies, what's really going on here, paying attention to myself and how I feel. And then I was like, okay, I was really locked in on my practice today. And I really noticed that as soon as I started to get into my Tai Chi posture, I was there. I was rooted. I could feel my chi moving better. I wasn't thinking about not thinking. I wasn't thinking about how I shouldn't be thinking about not thinking, but I'm still thinking about that thinking. And that's a lot of thinking. And that's not necessarily the deliberate and intentional and specific thinking that we intended to think at the outset, right? And that's a lot. And it's kind of like opposing forces when really what we're doing is we're trying to harmonize forces rather than oppose anything in that meditative posture. So same thing. If I want to sit down in a meditative posture and do whatever I'm hoping to, I guess that's a third point I want to make about the meditation. So if I sit down, I want to do something with the meditation. Well, if I was practicing my informal practices in my 4 directions before, I just couldn't help but notice how much easier I like slid into place in terms of what I wanted to do in that meditation. If it's a standing meditation, I want a well, any meditation, I would really appreciate a good, strong structural integrity. but I don't want to be sitting there thinking about and pondering and making all of these adjustments necessarily either. But what's one aspect of my informal practice? It's my structural integrity. It's my body or my internal point of attention. So if I have my internal point of attention active right before I go and do my formal meditation, it's easier. I don't have to do that. Cognitive direction. If I have my cognitive direction locked in and like I'm already noticing the silence behind the sound, I'm already seeing and I can really feel the aliveness and the vibrancy. And I'm like, oh, 9 o'clock, time to go meditate. What is the quality of the meditation compared to, fuck, 9 o'clock? Okay, I'm going to go meditate. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it. I'm going to not think. Do you see the difference in the quality of the beginning point? And then, of course, that's going to affect the quality of when you're in it. So, bottom line for this point is that the desire, which is going to lead to the second point, maybe I should have made the second point the first point, but it is what it is. And then I'm probably going to forget one of the points between now and then. So is my meditative practices in terms of formal practices and what I want from them are directly proportional to my informal practice going into it and coming out of it. And I think that's pretty obvious to me. Now, it wasn't always obvious to me, and that's what Long was trying to say. He's like, well, if your Tai Chi in your mind is good when you come to the park, well, all of our, beginning things that we do with our breathing and everything, you're going to be relaxed. And then your Tai Chi, you can really learn a whole lot more. Does that first point make sense? That's just a relative to the four directions. So if my four directions practice is consistent, then and it's strong and it's active to some degree, right? Then my formal practice is going to be a reflection of that as well. So my goal is to make sure that I go into my formal practices because frankly, if I am redirecting because of maybe an emotional response or something going on, maybe I'm a little bit stressed because of school and I got a lot of things going in my brain, and just the sheer volume creates taxation. Well, maybe sitting and meditating isn't what I want to do. Maybe moving is going to be a little bit better because I need to move my chi. Does that make sense? That first point? I think it's a fair point to make, and it's not always going to be the case. I get it, but I think it's valid.
It applies to everything though, doesn't it? Like if your informal practice is in place and or your formal practice is in place, then you weather the wobble of
Exactly.
stepping out of practice and back into practice more elegantly than if it's not, right?
Yep. Okay, here's point number two. So there came a time where I realized I didn't know why I was doing stuff. If and of course it was probably long. It was probably inner guru at a certain point. It's just like, Ernest, why do you do this? And I'm like, I don't I'm trying to trace it back. And of course, things are revealed to me. And I'm like, oh, that's why I do that. But that's a different scenario than trying to sit there and think, okay, yeah, why do I do this? What do I want from this? What is the desire? What is the intention? Where is the will? I can always look at anything in the human experience in this fashion, and things will be revealed to me. There's an underlying desire behind meditation. The desire to have no desire is still a desire. If you want to be Buddha, you want to be Buddha. If you want to be, you want that. I mean, it's just so obvious. And it is basic psychology, of course. We seek what we want, what can benefit us. The spirit does that. The physical body does that too. So the spirit also wants to be nourished. It wants to evolve. The human body, it wants to be nourished. It wants to grow. It wants to be strong. It wants to evolve. We see this in nature. It wants to. Sometimes, the universe is a fickle thing, and sometimes it doesn't work out all the time. Things are constantly moving and changing. But what I realized is that I don't always know what I want, and that's important. So what do I want from my formal meditative practice? It's the same thing that I want in any of my. Donna is gonna, of course, after I think each point that I make in each segment, it's like, well, that goes for everything. Yeah, because it's principle based. I think that should be a reoccurring thing. If I say something and you're like, well, no, that's only super specific to this maybe one scenario, it could be lacking a foundation of principle, whatever was said. So this is the same thing. It really is the same for everything. What do I want? Okay, so if I use death as my advisor and I know that I have a finite time before yin and yang separate, what do I want? Quality. That's a perfect word for it, right? We want that's seeing. We want to, and seeing is feeling it with your eyes. It's heavily eye dependent. Shen, according to Chinese medicine, can be seen in the eyes. Don Juan would talk about a shine. And I'm like, well, that's stupid. And then all of a sudden we saw that. We've seen that in people in Arizona. Shana and I told that story of the Nancy, her name is Nancy. But it was a story. We would talk of synchronicity. So why do we do anything? Why am I meditating? The feeling of quality. And then, of course, that's a two-part thing, feeling it. The quality's always there. What we really want to do is fill our bubble of perception with a feeling of quality, a feeling of timelessness. Ida, when you sit down to make art, you don't want to make something that people just look at. And a musician doesn't want to make music that people just listen to, or just hear. They really want them to listen to it. You want them to feel the art, not just look at it. You don't want to just looking and seeing it and feeling it are real two different things. You can tell when you meet somebody, are they really seeing you? Are they hearing what you have to say? Is there a feeling exchange occurring between the two people, or are we just talking? Like, is this just, sound waves bouncing off of you? Because it's like we're not even really communicating right now. We're not feeling each other. We're not vibing, as the young ones would say. So why am I doing anything? I will not sit down and meditate and be like, well, that was all right, or I would have rather done something different, but boy, I did it. So yeah, that is intention and will, but to me, that doesn't feel like I went up the mountaintop, a very difficult task, but in a very smooth and effortless type of way. It feels like I was struggling a little bit. And so for me personally, and I'm just sharing, how does that relate to the four directions and some of these fundamental principles? Feeling is important. It should feel smoother than that. So there's something, maybe I didn't set up my four directions practice very well before I went into the formal meditation, or maybe there's something that keeps reoccurring that needs to be maybe, I want to say maybe worked out or addressed or paid attention to before I get into that meditative state or attempt to get into that meditative state.